I'm Edward Warfield, the publisher of Citybiz, and I'm honored today to interview Mark Alexander, the CEO of Alexander Development Group. Welcome.
Hi, how you doing?
From 1977 to 2004, you were executive director of Hope Community. From 2004 to 2008, you were CEO of Urban Builders Collaboration. In 2004, you started Alexander Development Group. Can you provide an overview of your career and the decision to start Alexander Development Group?
Sure. So I actually started working at Hope Community, a small not-for-profit community housing organization back in the early 70s, and worked as a volunteer on and off until 77, when I became a property manager of several tenements that they purchased from a private owner on East 104th Street, and then became a full-time staff person. I did that until the early 80s, became a full-time staff person at Hope Community, and along the way became a director of property management, director of operations, and then executive director in 1994. So I was actually the executive director at Hope from 1994 to 2004. And I'd always had a dream of one day starting my own business and over time developing a portfolio for long-term ownership. So that was something that I sort of harbored for quite a time. And by 2004, Hope Community was in a good place for me to leave. They had plenty of money in the bank. They'd grown from an all-volunteer organization to almost 100 employees under my leadership, had several $1 million in the bank, and had, I think, close to 700 units of various types of development in the pipeline. So it was a good time for that organization for an executive director to move on. And it was also a point in my life. I was, I guess, how old was I? In my mid 40s at that point. It was kind of a time I thought that was, ripe for me to start a new adventure. Urban Builders Collaborative was essentially a joint venture between Alexander Development Group and Latier Construction, a contractor that I'd met while I worked at Hope Community, who built a new ground up affordable housing development for Hope Community, and Nick Latier and I kind of hit it off and decided to try. He had been trying to break into development for some time, and so we decided to form Urban Builders Collaborative as an effort for us to jointly do some new development work together. And while I was at Urban Builders working with Nick, we teed up 3 projects, completed one of those 3, and altogether I think it was 550 units and a couple of $100 million worth of development.
And so can you provide a snapshot of Alexander Development Group and the services that you provide?
Yeah, so Alexander Development Group is a boutique real estate development and finance advisory firm. It doesn't participate directly in any development. So any development that I participate in is through other, personally through other LLCs and other organizations. ADG itself is really an advisory firm. We work with other developers to assist them with affordable housing requirements. New York City now it's almost impossible to build rental housing in New York without some affordable housing component. And so we offer services to developers that aren't big enough to have their own internal affordable housing practitioners. We also provide plan review and other sorts of services like that to folks that are trying to build sustainable housing and want energy efficient housing, and also high quality layouts and floor plans. So there's a variety of services that we provide to other developers, primarily in the multifamily rental space.
And can you provide an overview of the major projects that ADG is working on now?
So ADG has, obviously worked on those projects with Latier. More recently, we've focused on I've become a little bit jaded about the challenges of working in New York City. Pricing of land has become exorbitant, but also the vagaries of the 421A program. It's been very hot and cold and misfired on several occasions. And that's not a political statement. It's just the facts of the program. They keep changing the program for a variety of reasons, some of them political, some of them economic, some of them to make the program more effective and administratively easier to manage. But the upshot of it is it's been very unstable over the past 10 or 15 years to figure out how to plan and build market rate rental housing in the city of New York. So we've put a lot of attention. Not that we aren't still interested in New York City, but we've shifted gears a lot over the last 10 years and focused a lot on southern Westchester County. Westchester County is a county with over 1 million inhabitants, population of over 1 million folks, and yet it's producing probably less than 5,000 units a year of Class A multifamily rental housing. And so there's a huge pent up demand for high quality housing in Westchester County, and the regulatory environment and other burdens in Westchester and the land values in Westchester County are much more to our liking. Create a playing field and a market environment that we feel is much more doable and workable. So in Westchester County, we completed a 75 unit rental in collaboration with a local property owner and business called The Horizon, a 75 unit development that was completed and rented up and stabilized in 2012. And then we have a third project that's in approval stage. It's near the Mount Vernon East train station, and we're expecting that to be approved at somewhere around 300 units.
So let's stay on 42 Broad. Let's talk about its design and sustainability.
Yeah, so 42 Broad it's really an extraordinary building. It's one of the most sustainable and energy efficient buildings in its class in the world. There's this energy standards program called FIAS, or Passive House. It's called Passive House, the designation. It's administered by FIAS, Passive House Institute of the U.S., a group that's based in Chicago. And the goal of Passive House designation is to create a building envelope and building systems that in totality allow a building to be 30 to 40% more energy efficient than a standard modern building. And so to put that into the context of New York City, New York State has its own building code and energy code. Buildings have to perform at a pretty high standard in New York State now. And with a Passive House built building that meeting Passive House standards, we project that 42 Broad will be somewhere between 37 and 40% more energy efficient than a comparable new building meeting New York State energy code. And that's an overall basis. If we just pinpoint heating, ventilating, and air conditioning, we think we'll be somewhere between 80 and 90% more energy efficient than a standard new building opening up in New York State these days. So it's very, very energy efficient, and that's accomplished by building a super energy efficient building envelope that's essentially airtight. Very, very very little air travels in and out of the building without going through the mechanical systems. It also has a high energy efficiency set of mechanical systems that includes VRF units up on the roof, variable refrigerant flow heating and cooling systems. and an energy recovery ventilator in each apartment that makes sure that the air coming into an apartment is both filtered and tempered before it hits the air in the apartment. And so that combination creates a super energy efficient mechanical system and heating and ventilating and air conditioning. It's also, the building is also sited 2 blocks away from the Fleetwood Metro North train station. So it's in the middle of a very walkable little downtown shopping district. And it's directly across the street from the on-off ramp to the Cross County Parkway. So we have a whole lot of different elements to this building. It's high density. It's transit oriented. It's in the middle of a local little downtown area, so people don't have to get in their car to shop for basic items, nor to eat out if they want to. There's probably a dozen restaurants within a 2-block walk of our building. CVS is a block away. The post office is a block away. 4 banks are about a block away. So all of those things create an opportunity for people to live a much, much lower carbon footprint lifestyle if they choose to live at 42 Broad. And we think it's going to be a game changer in terms of the marketability of this product, not just to the renters who are looking to rent in a high energy efficient environment, but we also think within the CRE community, when it comes time to create a capital event, we think that there's going to be a lot of interest in this building from investment funds and others who are looking for an investment opportunity in a high sustainability, high energy efficiency product, which really doesn't exist anywhere in the world at this scale. There's plenty of other smaller buildings, 30-unit buildings, 40-unit buildings, 60-unit buildings, 20-unit buildings that have gotten to the level that 42 Broad is at. And there are also some very large affordable housing buildings that have reached this level of efficiency. There really isn't any other that we can find or that we're aware of, any other Class A market rate multifamily bigger than maybe 150 units anywhere in the world. And so we think this is a pretty extraordinary building for those reasons.
And so what role did local contractors and the workforce play?
Well, that's another good question, Edwin. Because I come out of the community development background and our partner, the Bluestone organization, is also very involved in community development. It's kind of second nature to all of us to try to work with local businesses and local contractors, and in so doing, employ a lot of local people. So of our, I think, roughly $55 million of $50 to $55 million of directly purchased subcontracts and directly purchased materials, about 35 million was bought from companies based within a 5-mile radius of our site. So, and a lot of them in Mount Vernon itself, as just one, for instance, a tile distributor called Prospect, located in the south side of Mount Vernon. We purchased over $900,000 worth of porcelain tile from that one supplier. Our electrician is a minority owned, black owned electrician based here in Mount Vernon. The plumber is based, I think, in Pelham. The window company is based in Yonkers. So I could go on and on. It's just the Ross Windows, the installer of our windows, and the fabricator and installer of our curtain wall. They're a Mount Vernon-based company. So when we took a look during several points during construction, when there were typically anywhere from 120 to 150 construction workers on site, typically close to a third of all of the workers were either residents of Mount Vernon or residents within a 5-mile radius. In some cases, almost 40% within the 5-mile radius. So we think that that's a good thing on an overall basis. Obviously, you You don't want that to be at the expense of having a capable contractor doing high quality work, or a capable supplier supplying good materials at a reasonable cost on an on-time basis. Those things are all of paramount concern. But within the competitive landscape, if a local firm can provide those things, we'd like to give that local firm a chance.
And so how did the development team come together on the 42 Broad project?
So I chased this. This site was on and off the market probably from around 2010, 2009 to when we bought it. We went into contract, I think, in the late fall of 2013. So 10 years ago, almost 10 years ago, for crying out loud. That's crazy. And as we were looking for the deal, I knew that this was, I came out of affordable housing. I wasn't born with a silver spoon in my mouth. I didn't make any significant amount of wealth. The entire wealth pretty much that I earned at Hope Community was my 401k account, a few $100,000 there, I think, after 27 years at Hope Community. And so I needed a financial partner who was willing to put up their balance sheets and the guarantees for me to be able to call myself a developer, or in this case, co-developer of the project. And the Bluestone organization and I had known each other from the affordable housing industry for probably 10 or 15 years. We'd never done anything together. We'd almost done something together, but never pulled the trigger. And so they were one of maybe two or three companies that I reached out to as I was getting into the contract to see if any of them would be interested in working with me. And Steve Bluestone was kind of the front person at the Bluestone organization at the time, that I developed a pretty, pretty good rapport with almost immediately. And that led to the two organizations joining together as co-developers on the project. And although they are a minority partner within the JV in terms of the financial, the dollars that they put into the project, they put up all of the meaningful, balance sheet and financial guarantee requirements. And I should also point out, just one other thing I'll point out, they're the guys that really push. Steve Bluestone is sort of Renaissance man kind of guy. He's the guy that really pushed the sustainability features during the design phase. He and I worked very, very closely together during the design phase of this project. And he and Eric Bluestone really pushed hard at first to build the building to a high energy efficiency standpoint. And then when JP Morgan became our partner and they wanted us to go for LEED designation, Eric Bluestone pushed hard back and said, listen, we're familiar with Passive House. We think that's a better standard and a more meaningful standard to go with. We'd rather spend a very small additional amount of money on hard cost and qualify for a Passive House designation. And so they were very instrumental, not only as co-developers in putting up the financial guarantees, but also in pushing this notion of high sustainability features.
Interesting. So are there any case studies that you'd like to share with us?
Well, we have one case study on our the Horizon project was another really interesting project in Mount Vernon. It was a busted condo deal that was claimed to be 2/3 finished with construction, but more like 55 to 60% when you uncovered all the latent defects. And so we have actually a case study published on our website about that project. It was a cool project. I mean, in my early years at Hope Community, we did all sorts of renovation projects, most of the time with tenants in occupancy. So trying to replace floor joists in somebody's kitchen while they're still living in the apartment is a little bit of a hairy proposition. And so we learned a lot about latent defects and challenging construction environments and maintaining safety protocols in a highly challenging. I mean, the city would never do that these days, but they had tens of thousands of in-rem property, tens of thousands of in-rem housing units that they'd taken for back taxes back in the 70s and 80s, and didn't know what the hell to do with them. And they needed community organizations like Hope Community to help find solutions. And so, everybody just kind of made it up as we went along back in the 1980s and into the early 90s to try and, really rebuild devastated communities. So we learned a whole lot about kind of dealing with challenging environments in those days. And that those lessons were applied to this busted, construction project in Mount Vernon that I think was dormant from 2008, late 2007, early 2008, until we restarted construction in late 2010. So it was a derelict site for about almost 3 years when we finally stepped in and turned it around.
And who pulled you into that? Who got you interested in that site? Was it?
Well, that was complete serendipity. My son was dating the daughter of a title company guy who invited me to a Christmas party and sat me across the table from the Petrillo family. And it turned out that they and we were looking at the same deal at the same time. And it just complete, oh, okay, well, we need capital. And they said, well, we need a developer. And so we kind of agreed that we, work on it together. And it was a really, really successful project. Not a huge project, but, we bought the asset for, probably 25, 30 cents on the dollar, put in another 10, 11 million bucks in, to finish it up. And then we ended up, placing it with Freddie Mac a year after we, 8 months after we stabilized the property, and essentially cashed out the entire investment with that Freddie Mac placement. So and that's the property that kind of got me to pay attention to Mount Vernon and made me realize, you know what, if it's near a train station and in a halfway decent neighborhood, you build a good product. You're not looking at the comps from the surrounding neighborhood, which are all tired, unamenitized 1950s and 60s and early 70s buildings. You're creating a new market, and your competition is the higher end of Yonkers and Mamaroneck and New Rochelle. And in the case of 42 Broad, we're competitive with White Plains as well.
Which I think leads us to my next question. Can you provide an overview of the state of affordable housing in New York? It's hard to even ask that question.
So let's start with New York City, because New York City is really different to some degree than the rest of the state. And the economics of downstate New York are completely different than the economics of upstate New York. So I'll focus on New York City, and then if you want to try and extrapolate to other areas, we can. So New York City has been in a housing, people talk about a housing emergency since, World War II. So the end of World War II. In my view, it's not a housing emergency. It is a highly constrained and highly regulated and highly dysfunctional marketplace, exacerbated by a zoning code that hasn't been rewritten since 1961, a tax assessment regime that disfavors rental housing to a gargantuan degree, and a building code that only recently has been modernized and in my view still has some way to go. And so affordable housing in New York is so that's the sort of my larger sort of view of the rental housing market in New York, and the affordable side of it, it's kind of two different worlds. There's the NYCHA side, which is about 180,000 units citywide, that's for the most part in deplorable condition and been allowed, in spite of massive amounts of spending, been allowed to decay over the last 40 years roughly. And then there's the newer affordable housing that is probably the most expensive housing being built, rental housing, being built in New York City, even compared to most market rate rentals. It's more expensive to build, not counting land. If we exclude the cost of land, if we just call it hard costs and soft costs spend, the affordable housing units are almost all being built now for over $500,000. So in some cases, as much as $600,000 a unit. And, by comparison, we built 42 Broad, including land and entitlements and everything else for a little over $400,000 a unit. So that there's not a direct comparison there necessarily, but even in New York, people that are building in most of the city outside of the absolute top of the market in the core Manhattan, most builders are building for $350 to $375 a foot for hard costs, and another $75 to $100 a square foot for soft costs, for an all-in number of less than $500,000. So that's crazy, and there's some reasons why it's the case, but I wouldn't call that the sign of a healthy marketplace. I think it's a function of a lot of dysfunction in the market, a lot of distortions in the market, and so I think it's the state of New York's housing is not great, and it's exacerbated by this on-off affair with the 421A with the tax benefits program, real estate tax benefits program.
So do you have any solutions that could affect, that could have an impact?
Of course I have solutions. So I say this tongue in cheek, but no, I've been in this industry for many, many years, and most folks that know me as being a pretty straightforward, sometimes painfully straightforward person. And I think there are three areas that if adopted would lead to a huge surge in development. The first is, I would argue that we should designate portions of the city opportunity for affordable living zones. And what would be the whole thing about that is any new rental building would be assessed such that it's capturing only 10% of the first year's, or average the first 2 years, or average the first 3 years. I figure it out, but 10% of gross revenue. If rental housing was taxed for real estate tax purposes at 10% of gross revenue, that would solve the 421A issue forever. Every building developer I know could build thousands of units, hundreds and thousands of units, if they knew that their assessment was going to be capped at 10% of their gross revenue for the first 15 or 20 year life of that building. Number two, in those same areas, allow, or everywhere in the city, allow stick on podium in all zoning districts up to R6 or R6 equivalent. So, you go to Seattle, you go all over this country, and there's very large scale building that's allowed to be done with stick on podium or in engineered wood. And New York hasn't figured that out. And it's a shame. I can understand where in, say, downtown Brooklyn or core of Manhattan, you don't want to have that sort of housing. But anywhere outside of those business districts where you've got an R6 or less dense district, they should allow stick-on podium. The third item, which is typically anywhere from $50 to $100 cheaper per square foot than block and plank or poured plate or that sort of construction. And the third, and it's only three things we need to do to solve this problem: eliminate all parking requirements in R6 and higher density districts. Period. Across the board, no parking is required. If a developer can figure out the math on the parking to make it profitable, they'll build it. But there should be no requirement, especially in this day and age of everybody wanting to disfavor cars. There shouldn't be any requirement ever to build parking in the moderate to high density districts of New York. It becomes a little bit of a different, the challenges become quite a bit different in the lower density districts where people oftentimes have 2 or 3 cars in a family. And until you're ready to essentially take cars away from people, you're going to have to provide for parking in the lower density areas of the city. But in the medium to high density, there should be no requirement for parking. It adds an enormous cost tax to the smaller sites where you're trying to pigeonhole parking into a 50 or 75 or 80 foot wide lot by 100 foot lot. It makes for, enormous brain damage and enormous cost unnecessarily, in my view. So those are my 3 solutions to solving New York's housing.
Hopefully Robert Moses is turning over in his grave. Who knows? Exactly. So, Mark, I could continue, but I enjoyed learning about your projects and where you came from. It's your career seems distinctive for most developers, and I'm excited to hear about your recent projects. Thank you for your time, and keep us apprised of your latest developments.
Edwin, thank you so much. I really have enjoyed our chat.